Welcome back. A member of the Canadian Forces has been killed in a car accident in South Carolina. His wife and their young son were also killed. Private Jeremiah Cross was a member of the Canadian Forces based in Petawawa, Ontario. The multi-vehicle crash happened Saturday night on Interstate 95 near the border with North Carolina. The couple and their 7-month-old son were returning from their March break vacation in Florida. 2 other people were killed in this same crash. We're tracking this next story very closely today for you. A Canadian doctor is said to be among a group of medical workers that might have crossed into territory controlled by the ISIS terror group in Syria. His name is Ismail Hamdoun. He's from Toronto, Canadian Sudanese origin. He's part of a group of 11 medical doctors and students that might have crossed into Syria within the last 10 days. Some of the students' parents have released a statement saying the group has been brainwashed by ISIS. The medics are thought to be working in ISIS-controlled hospitals. Let's get some analysis on this now. Joining us from Hamilton, Ontario, Hussein Hamdani. He is a lawyer and he works with families whose children are at risk of being radicalized. And in Toronto, we have Ahmed Sahi. He is spokesperson for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Youth Association. Good to have both of you back with me again here on another panel. Really appreciated the last time we had you on. Hussein, I want to start with you. When the three of us were talking, we talked a lot about disenfranchised people joining ISIS. At one point, you used the term sort of losers joining this group on the fringes of society. But in this case, these are medical students, highly educated. What do you make of that?
However, you got to keep in mind that these guys left from Sudan. And so there's a group of Sudanese that were in med school together. They went from Sudan to Istanbul and Istanbul over to Syria. It's disappointing, for sure. You know, it just reminds me, it doesn't surprise me, but it reminds me the importance of prevention. We need to invest in preventative measures. We need to get out to these young people, whether they're in Canada or they're Canadians studying abroad, and let them know about the evils of an organization like ISIS.
Ahmed, you obviously heard that the families of some of these people said they had been brainwashed by ISIS, medical students, medical doctors. What's the allure here for them as you're sort of trying to piece this together as to how this might have happened? What do you make of it?
You know, Todd, I think certainly it's surprising anytime any youth who's been sort of raised in the West to become radicalized, especially to the point of going abroad and wanting to fight overseas. But with the news of these doctors or medical students, certainly it's perhaps even a little more surprising. I think that's sort of the threat posed by these ideological recruiters, and that's sort of the global appeal of ISIS and how they're recruiting people from all over the world. People in one corner feel like, yeah, there's people from every part of the world coming together, and when you combine that with these ideological recruiters who paint a picture of a glorified jihad, which, while wholly alien to Islam, sometimes can appeal to these young and unstable minds.
Hussein, the idea behind ISIS, the Islamic State, is to create their own caliphate, of course, as you know, create a society in this part of the world between Syria and Iraq, and that includes a civil society, that includes hospitals, that includes building up infrastructure, providing services to people that live under ISIS rule. And that includes, of course, medical doctors. Is that part of this allure, though, for some of these doctors, possibly?
Oh, it's absolutely the allure. So, you know, you take young people and who, you know, you've heard me say it before, who seem disenfranchised, who seem to have very little future here in the West, and you say, come over to our territory. We're establishing a whole new state. We're establishing an Islamic state. We need you. This is your home. This is paradise on earth. If you don't see a very bright future here in Canada and you have all this false temptation in these words over there, it can be attractive for someone who's got nowhere to go here but has some illusions of grandeur over there. And so you're right. They want to build a state, and they're using religion as a cloak to justify their wanting for control and for power and for territory. And for them to maintain that, they need civil society like hospitals, schools, etc., like you outlined.
Ahmed, how much of a pull do you think that actually is, this idea of this sort of romantic notion of going over it and helping to build an Islamic state from the ground up, however twisted and perverted that might be from our viewpoint, but if you are one of these students or doctors, how they might interpret it?
No, I think that's a major pull for them. And I think that that's sort of something that's been unique to ISIS as opposed to other terror groups in the past, is that they have this ideological peg of caliphate and of building a quote-unquote Islamic state, which is sort of appealing to and motivating and rallying youth from across the world. But I want to touch on this point of caliphate in a little more detail. You know, in Islamic history, this is a concept which has a lot of value for Muslims. But I think the unfortunate part is that this caliphate of ISIS is getting a lot of publicity. But you know, as far as the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is concerned, Muslims who believe in the Messiah, Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, we've been under caliphate for over 100 years. And just recently, our caliph, Mirza Masroor Ahmed, at the Peace Symposium in London, spoke out against ISIS and all the violent crimes that they've been perpetrating.
And Hussein, there is certainly this idea that ISIS is very much in the headlines, and it's now the cause du jour for radicalized people, and they sort of cloak themselves in Islam, but really it's just sort of this appeal that, you know, in the past perhaps there was, you know, communism, or there was Nazism, or there was anarchism, this kind of thing. Now it's this kind of form of radical terrorism.
Yeah, absolutely, Ton. And you can see that with the young Canadians that we know of who've already gone over and died. We heard about a young guy from Windsor who died just 2-3 days ago. You know, this seems to be the cool sort of fight. And I was at a conference, the First in Canada conference, just over the weekend with the Council of Imams, Public Safety, RCMP, and my group, Nasser, 125 imams and civic leaders having a discussion with RCMP and Public Safety. And one of the comments that one of the speakers made was that some of the allure that young people have today wasn't much different than the allure that Canadians had who went off to join World War I. Some of them in World War I just thought it was a legitimate war, it's a just cause, and it was only going to be about 4 months before they came back. Young men, young women are off to look for some type of grandeur when they have very little going on for themselves at the moment.
I want to thank both of you for coming on the panel once again, Ahmed Sahi and Hussein Hamdani. Good to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks.